Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good evening. It's the 9th of April, 2020, and we are in day something or other of quarantine. And this is our second evening edition, and we are doing this remote from the internet. So, technology for the win.
They should have gone out today. And then April 13th. Yeah, because
Well, I thought they were supposed to start going out today, but
I thought they were supposed to start going out today, but then it shows at the latest April 13th. So then I guess on April 23rd, people who get Social Security and don't file taxes will get them, and then people who don't have their information on the IRS will get them on May 3rd, apparently, supposedly. So we'll see if these play out the way they're supposed to. That it took a month to get them starting to go out in the first place is atrocious. I don't know if you saw, apparently they need COBOL coders to help work shit out.
wait, COBOL?
Yes.
Like the...
A 61-year-old computer language.
Let me guess, the people who hired him, they stopped studying computer science with Fortran, right?
Probably.
I remember taking like a COBOL primer at one point, and I thought, like, what the crap? But I guess it does underpin quite a bit of systems, like really old systems that are kind of fundamental to our current information infrastructure.
They're only fundamental because old people won't learn anything new.
Yeah.
And they keep saying, "Oh, the stuff works." No, it doesn't. It works for a bit, and then it breaks down almost all the time.
But isn't that the nature of any software platform, that unless it's undergoing continuous development, it's not going to be able to evolve with the needs of users?
That's why continuous development is a paradigm, and it's not one that the older generation recognizes. So it's the same reason that they don't have cybersecurity intelligence in the same way as other countries. So it's like they have cybersecurity officials, but the level of cybersecurity fitness in this country and government is like, it's atrocious.
Yeah.
And that's just one area. Like, obviously the medical fitness was not there. This country was clearly not prepared for a pandemic. So like, just imagine COVID hitting the internet in America, like a version of COVID that affects internet, like protocols. And I'm saying that affects as many nodes and compromise. I'm not talking about worms.
No.
I'm talking about actual, like a botnet that takes over.
Yeah.
Like Wall Street.
I was actually just thinking there is actually a botnet that took over Wall Street. About a decade ago, these bots were found running zombie nets that were able to create issue microtransactions at rates that were like, beyond what normal traders would be able to do on their own. And what ended up happening is they would be making these tiny trades and then making small amounts of money between, like, the clock cycle itself.
Yeah, they never actually took over. I'm talking about complete compromise, because what ends up happening is they cause a flash crash and then they get found out. So it's like those botnets
yeah.
are.
You're describing something that would take much longer to actually get in place before they would turn it on.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
on top of that, once it's turned on, nobody would. So I'm saying, okay, you know how when you encounter a woman on the internet, it's probably not actually a woman. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Unless you know them in person in real
unless
life.
you know them in person, it's probably not actually a real like a real woman. Especially if they're like hitting on you. So like there's all these things about the way the internet works that has already compromised um identity. Like there are things concerning impacts of what are called black swan events, which are um unforeseen if nobody's paying attention to the specialists who are warning him. But if it's a black swan event in any area where now it's the coronavirus in the healthcare, like if there was a black swan event in any other thing right now, whether it was like um a massive string of tornadoes across the country, a huge hurricane, like that we weren't prepared for. There's all these things that the government should be preparing for, but what it effectively does is legislates how other people in the private sector should then prepare something to be sold to us. And that cycle has run its course where now they're telling GM to make ventilators. We had this discussion concerning, we're at a point where we thought we were at a point where we could put the bells and the whistles on the cars. We think we're at a point where we can put bells and whistles on society, but we don't have the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Because anytime something is unexpected, everything breaks down on the verge of like complete failure. Where if we had not spent all of our time on leisure activities and extroversion for the sake of preoccupying ourselves away from reality, then we'd be actually prepared when these black swan events happen. So it's like nobody paid attention to the ant and the grasshopper parable.
It occurred to me that there was once a time, and I remember this very clearly, when there was coding done that was lightweight, and it was, relatively perfect in the sense that you get like a Super Nintendo or a Nintendo. Let's just talk about the Nintendo, or that was an 8-bit system, and every line of code was locked to the clock cycle. They filled it up or they didn't use it, and they used it because they didn't have a lot of space. But that's also the reason those games rarely ever failed, and usually when they failed, it's a power failure, or it's like a capacitor blows up because it's a faulty component. But the reality is, and I would actually challenge any. Hold on.
They failed a lot. Because that's why you had to blow them out.
But that's an electromechanical failure. But the game itself, if you could get it to load and you can make the system run, they were rock solid. And so what ends up happening is, we had this once, and those machines were really good, and they had to create a better gaming system with better graphics to lure people into a new machine. But I mean, straight up, in the 80s, if you had a Nintendo and you had Zelda and you didn't have Nintendo Power, you weren't finding all the cool shit. You just weren't. You didn't know anything about any of that stuff. You had to explore every single square that Link could roll on. And even then, I mean, we're talking about like not just days or hours like some games nowadays, but like we're talking like weeks, months of exploration. And those games were hard and fun, and seriously, without a guide, you're only going to play like the most basic 10% of that game, and that's something that has changed. And I remember like subsequent versions of Zelda where the story got a little bit more complicated because there was more space, and then they tried to make it like an open world, and after a while it stops. It becomes all about the visuals. and then the story itself was pretty much ironed out.
I don't know. Have you played the stuff like on Wii or Switch? Because I don't.
I played on Wii. That was like that was the last
What is it
Nintendo's.
like, Wind Waker or
Uh,
something?
I can't even remember anymore.
Because I stopped playing them, but I don't like Nintendo games most of the time.
The only ones
But
that I liked were the Mario games. Really, those are the only ones that had any
I
real replay.
I'm fairly positive that Zelda, like, they split off. So there's like, you remember when they started doing like Dr. Mario?
Oh yeah.
So they started doing like Zelda, um, what's the
Universe
word?
games.
Zelda universe games that are like casual games, and then there's the Zelda story arc games. So there's
Hmm.
like, you might pick up one and there's no plot to it at all, but the other one that they might make one every 3 or 4 years
Yeah, that
has a
makes sense.
long story arc. So like they definitely have, like, when you're making the observation that the games didn't have the story, they definitely had that happening. But then there was also the story,
You
because
know,
it happens. There's like a casual game market
yeah,
that emerged and actually
where you
became
play
bigger.
games within the game predominantly.
Yeah,
Well, what's funny is that I always felt like those kinds of versions of games, were really just test beds for a different style of gameplay or a different type of interaction with the tunes, because they couldn't just like run dark tests without letting people know that there was a game in the pipeline. And why not let people beta test a certain type of environment before you commit to some really complex story? Give them an opportunity to learn how to play in that universe. I don't know. Maybe Zelda's a weird example because it's already a complex game. But there are other systems like first PlayStation. That system was locked to the times code too, and that was another reason those games, once they loaded, they just ran. I remember my first Xbox. That thing actually had problems. I never got a red ring, like, ever. But there were times where it would just stop playing, and I attribute that to, I lived in a really ancient apartment house. It was a converted house that had bad electricity, and anytime the city bus would drive by, the lights would kind of flicker a little. It was really surreal. But
yeah. There's a lot of shitty wiring in America.
but that's the thing. There's a version of coding where it's lightweight, and it was good. It didn't fail. It wasn't problematic. It didn't require massive updates. I don't ever remember updating my PlayStation. Like, I
I
mean,
mean, I
is
don't
it?
think it would have held it, because that's where they had the memory cards, because
Yeah.
the PlayStation wouldn't have had enough. Like,
How are you gonna load firmware into something like that?
I don't even know if the internet would have. Well, yeah, because we were probably playing online by then.
Yeah. Well, there was SOCOM by the time there was a
Yeah,
PlayStation
SOCOM
2.
definitely. Yeah, that was PS2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a
Um,
time when that stuff was, they paid really close attention to those details. I think that a lot of, it's the continuous upgrade, evolutionary program design that takes us away from this idea of, here's a game, it's done, it's finished, that's it. If you want a different game, you got to wait for the next version of the game. And I think that was like really beneficial.
well, it's the DLC culture. Like,
Yeah.
really, once game companies started realizing that people would pay more for extra content, and then they're like, oh, then we'll make a whole game, and then sell you part of the game as a whole game, and then sell you the DLC, which is actually the whole game. So you end up paying $150 for a game that should be $60. Well, it's okay. I think this is a good place to discuss the distorted concepts of what we're paying, because, like, we got used to paying $40 or $50 for a video game, even when they were on Nintendo. I think they were still like 40 or 50 for the new
Oh yeah,
release.
no, I remember.
So it's like that's always
I
been the
remember paying
range.
$50 for Mario 3
So it's like
in the
we've just
80s.
been accustomed to saying, like, oh, a game is $50, but then they don't have any standard of saying, like, oh, if we're paying $50, then they have to give us at least 60 hours of gameplay, because some games you'll play them, they're like 5 hours, some games are 3 hours, then some games are 100 hours.
Yeah.
And there's no real standard of
Well,
how long a game has to be.
I
for what
remember
you play.
Final Fantasy VII when it came out. If you followed the guide step by step, you played the most straightforward version of Final Fantasy VII, and it took a minimum of 40 hours. It was a 40-hour game if you watch through. You have to watch all the cinematics. But what was interesting is that if you went through all the side quests, I think that game ends up running around 170 hours. If you do everything like 100% completion, and nobody does that. Well, some people do that. There's because they wrote a guide for it. But even then, very few people are going to take on the task of playing the entire game, because by the time they get done with the bulk of it, the next version's already been released, and it's time to actually, I think they're re-releasing Final Fantasy VII with updated graphics.
Yeah, they are.
So,
But then Iron Man 2, which had great potential, gets pushed out early and costs the same, and you can beat it in like 10 hours and maybe 30 if you stretch it.
yeah.
But it's the same cost as fucking Final Fantasy VII. So that's where, and then, so like on that scale, I don't know how many people got paid over years to make something like that. Because then you look at something like Grand Theft Auto, those games take years to make.
They're still being made.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's an evolutionary platform. It's never going to be complete.
But then, like, compared to a movie, so like, if I'm going to watch a movie, that's 2 hours, maybe 3 hours if it's a really long movie, and that's like
Or 48 if we watch all of the MCU.
But one in a theater is going to cost me like $10 or $15.
Yep.
That's a quarter of a video game, which could potentially be 170 hours worth of gameplay.
Yeah.
So all these like experiences are like the cost of attaining them are they're just off. And then the people who make them aren't getting compensated adequately. So there's all these things about where we're at now.
It's
games are fucked, man.
This is all peak capitalism.
Yeah, it really is. And it just comes down to like the companies who wanted to exploit the games have no care about the quality and the art of the game. So it's like art emerges ever so often within game design because a few game designers get lucky, like, and make something just happens to have the right executives that don't rush them out on a specific deadline, because deadlines kill games. Like I over and over will accept a game that's late and perfect rather than a game that's pushed to a specific deadline, because it's never good. If it's like, oh, they said it's gonna come out April 13th, we're gonna push it out April 13th. It's not gonna be good. There's gonna be something that's horribly wrong with it that they should have just waited a fucking week and fixed it every goddamn time.
Yeah.
Every fucking time, and for whatever reason, some dumbass executive always tries to stay on the deadline.
Well, there's always somebody grinding on the grindstone to make it happen. They want it now because they made some promise in the meeting at some point, and if they don't, then they're going to get chewed out for making some promise they couldn't keep.
Yep.
And so they push.
That's what it comes down to.
They push out it's called feature creep, when they keep adding things on, and it never finishes. They never finish development because something's always being added on. So they end up with a patchwork of systems that don't work right because there's something that's held together by a Band-Aid. And then you end up with weird bugs that have to be addressed downstream. You end up with interfaces that don't always resolve. It's pretty crazy, actually. That's actually one of my biggest complaints about the whole concept of evolutionary development, is that, if we just take a little while, maybe these things could be worked out. Maybe these interface problems could be solved. Maybe the issue of a menu within a menu in a web browser not opening for anyone could be addressed. Because that's another thing that seems to be a big part of that culture, the internet. and the thing that we look at every day, and the things that we were, everyone rushed to Zoom, and it turns out Zoom had all these security flaws, and they fixed it like literally within 12 hours. They fixed it. I mean,
Well,
until
they've been
somebody
there
else.
for like a couple of years,
Yeah,
and
that's the
people were
thing.
like complaining about it, but there weren't enough users to make a fucking stink, and that's
Yeah.
what ended up happening. Is once millions and millions of people flocked to it, and all the security people were like, "Hey, all you guys need to be aware that if you have a link out, anybody can come in and start it, Zoom bombing or whatever, compromise your computer, like it runs in the background, so they could have looked at your camera. There's all these things that were wrong with it,
Yeah.
where you're like, why weren't they doing anything? Because they didn't have to. Like, there just weren't enough people to push them around. And once there just became enough people to be like, hey, fix this, then they had to fucking fix it.
Yeah, well, the U.S. Or Congress issued a statement advising zero use of Zoom. I'm assuming
Yep.
it's for government, but
Yep.
you fucked up when Congress says not to use your software.
Google is not allowing it.
Google has Hangouts and Duo and
Well, but they explicitly banned it now.
oh, well,
Yeah, it wasn't banned before. They came out and explicitly banned it.
that's crazy because Google lets their employees use iPhones.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, they said they banned it out of security concerns because it was not previously banned.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's what I think is happening, that there hasn't been as a lot of cyber attacks yet, makes me think that there's either a lot of big ones in the work or one really, really major one in the work. And I'm talking to like state level, in that because like everybody just seems to have forgotten about the what is it, Experian?
Oh, the Experian debacle, their security hold.
Yeah. So social security numbers for anybody who was associated with Experian, which is like I think 150 million people, those were like compromised already. Then you take the unemployment rates skyrocketing, and a bunch of people vulnerable, waiting for their checks. There's going to be a bunch of robocalls trying to exploit that shit happening probably in the next month.
Didn't we have
maybe a month after that?
Like the number of unemployment filings was the same as like the total of like Great Depression or something like that?
I think, yeah.
It's like even
it's gotten something ridiculous.
Like the peak rate of unemployment during Great Depression. I think it's like similar, but not over the same time frame. What we're experiencing is it's like one of those unbelievable, how can this happen type thing, because you know what? The people that survived the Great Depression, I'm pretty sure most of them were gone. I think most of them are gone by now.
Yeah, I think most of them are. There's still a few stragglers for sure, but that's like, I think, 3.2%. Oh wait, no, 25%. Peak rate. Yeah, unemployment reached 25% at the peak rate, it looks like, during the Great Depression. So that's 60 million people. That doesn't sound impossible now.
No. Not at all.
Official current unemployment rate is 4.4%, which is complete nonsense, obviously.
I bet that
nonsense.
That number probably does not reflect the backlog of
Right.
that they haven't been able to process, because all of these these departments have been defunded on some level, so they're running at like low manpower, and with an influx that it's what's happened to the healthcare system. Their ability to handle the incoming requests has been reached. They're backed up. But unlike our healthcare system, people aren't, you know, hooked up to ventilators. Hopefully, maybe some are by now because this has been going on for a few days now.
Yeah.
It gets worse. Now I read that some of the doctors in New York think that the ventilators are causing more harm than good, and ultimately they're looking for other options. It looks like survival rates on ventilators aren't as good as we need them to be, and they cause damage to the lungs apparently if they're not monitored very closely, like the entire time.
Yeah, this is, it's like trying to change a fucking tire on a car on the highway in motion.
The thing that I've seen a video of some guys in the Middle East, actually, they get their Forerunner up on two wheels, and the guys get out and they stop the wheels that aren't on the ground, and they take the wheels off and like swap them, I think.
Yeah.
While driving down there. I mean, that's like, that's some Wild West shit that's like beyond anything that our domestic U.S., truck culture has ever done. I've never seen anything like that. There's only one video of it. It's like, that's like a big challenge right there. It's like, come on, guys, we just raised the bar, do something even crazier. And I have yet to see something like that's actually crazy. I mean, who takes the wheels off the vehicle in motion?
Yeah. Oh man, that's some shit where you're like, okay, practice this while you don't need it, and then once you actually need it, you're fucking ready. That's the shit right there.
Yes. Better to have and not need than need and not have.
Yeah. Yeah, because then if you're on the highway with those dudes, you ain't got to worry about shit. Because I'm always, if I'm ever on the highway, I'm always in the back of my head thinking like, what if a tire pops right now? It's just one of those things that I'm always thinking about, just because I want to make sure I can react to it, so I never stop thinking about it. But this gets back to when people get lax is when shit happens, which is why I always think about my tire potentially popping and don't get lax about it. And that's, we're in the midst of this shit we're getting to a point where people want to start relaxing because they're not sick and they haven't died yet. And it's like, that's the exact time and you don't need to relax, because that's when the shit hits you. And I think people tend to forget that.
They're finding that people are, it takes 37 days on average for our immune system to react and produce enough antibodies that that a person would test negative for the coronavirus.
After they've been infected, or just like after they've shown symptoms?
I think this is like once the incubation period is done and you're like, you got it or you don't. You're one of the 30% or whatever who require a ventilator, and it's like and you recover. It's like a 37-day countdown from then until they don't find, until they can't test for it anymore. When it's just 37 days.
Yeah.
That's like way long. That's way longer than we thought it was. That's over 5 weeks by a day. But still, it's 5 weeks. Not 2 weeks, not 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And that's like one person who gets it. And so everyone else who doesn't have it or doesn't want to get it, they've got to avoid everyone for a period of longer than 37 days, because we've got to account for anyone who's been exposed who might, pop up here or there. And then it's a countdown, because there's no telling. And it might take longer. We don't know. There might be like people who don't produce enough antibodies. I was reading that they're finding higher levels of antibodies in older people, like people over 40, than they are in people under 40. I'm not sure exactly what that means, because the recovery rates are pretty good for people who are younger, but
they probably need them more. They probably need more antibodies to recover.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Because it's like, the younger bodies recover faster with less energy.
Yeah.
And effort.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually. But that's the thing. Like, you're one of that. If someone gets it, a severe case of it, even if they don't, actually no, I think it's more dangerous on the other end. If you get like a really mild case of it and it takes 37 days, after like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you're like, man, I feel fine, and then you go outside and then you transmit that shit to somebody that you didn't mean to. I think that's how it works.
Yeah, I think the danger is in the transmission more than anything
Yeah.
for a lot of people, just because it's like that bus driver who was
Oh,
complaining about the lady coughing and then died a few days later, where you don't want to be the person who's like, oh, I'm sick but I need to go to the grocery store, and end up giving it to the bus driver even
yeah.
though you're a 25-year-old and healthy enough.
Yeah, man,
It's like
I went to
60-year-old
the
bus
I went to
driver.
Kroger today, and I was almost done getting everything I needed, and then I'm walking by an aisle, and this lady just started. She just coughed real big. She was wearing a mask. I was wearing a mask. I tried to avoid her, but it's one of those things like, oh man, I'm I'm just gonna tell myself she's got really bad allergies or she smokes a pack a day,
Right.
and it's just a normal thing. It's nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Which is probably is. I mean, that's it's allergy season,
Yeah.
and I think that's
That's the extra scary part of all this. There's allergies
yeah.
and people
And then it's
smoke.
like, oh, is the scratchy dry throat? Is it COVID or is it allergies? Is the fucking
Is the filter to my furnace or HVAC system all dust covered and pumping out all nasty shit? That's another one.
well? And then I don't know. They're now saying that a a lot of the New York cases came explicitly from Europe and not from China. And then B, they think that it might have been in California as early as November, which also lines up with the quote unquote vaping deaths that they were trying to pass off as randomly happening and still just disappearing out of the news. So let's
Oh,
fucking stop
I've
this Chinese virus
we
nonsense.
got a
It might come out of fucking America, if anything.
I got a little explanation about the ventilators. So, Jason Luna points out that when they max out the ventilator, it overinflates the capillaries and causes lung damage. But
Mm,
apparently, this is necessary. And then there's a quote here. It says, results showed that blood groups was associated with a higher risk for acquiring COVID-19
yeah.
compared with non-A blood groups, whereas blood group O is associated with lower risk. I'm sure there's something to do with like the shape of the blood, the red blood cell itself.
I mean, very possible, but they haven't done enough studies on why the differences are in the blood samples or in the blood types. Because it may be, there may be a genetic component to specific like types that may influence their immune system. Like, there's all these things about it. Like, you could very well be right. They're just not in a position to be exploring those like avenues right now because they have to focus
All
so
the beds
heavily
are
on
full. All the
right.
ventilators
Yeah.
are in use.
Yeah.
Oh, so here's something else that I read today. It turns out that the national stockpile was distributed evenly to each state. So, regardless of size or of population or distribution of population or any of that, how many hospitals they have, they were all sent the same number of whatever it was that the federal government was stockpiling instead of measuring what they had and making adjusted deliveries based upon need.
That sounds like when somebody doesn't have enough of something and they're like, this is the easiest way to just do this.
I mean, that's like how you play Risk the first time you play Risk. I'm just going to put these out evenly and see how it goes.
Right.
I don't know anything about this.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof.
For those of you who play Risk, we all know you got to go for Australia. If you can get Australia, you've won. You just have to know how to place your pieces. You also have to know how to read those cards, and that's something that a lot of people I don't think people spend the time to understand the way the card game portion of Risk works.
Well, speaking of Australia, they're talking about going. They're full on talking about going herd immunity, and
Oh
I'm like,
man.
okay, before this shit all happened, their forests were on fire. So I'm not sure the people who are literally burning their forests down should be the ones making decisions about herd immunity or like how we should react to pandemics. Because last I remember, they were like colonialists who shouldn't necessarily be there, and they're destroying a habitat that has been there for over 60,000 years, and it's like the barrier reef near destroyed, fucking all this shit that Australia is not doing correctly. Maybe they shouldn't be making decisions on how to respond to a pandemic. Maybe that's just me, but I don't know. I'm starting to think that Australia shouldn't be making decisions. I
Well,
know they have to, technically. As a government, I know they have to, but maybe they should just go ask, like,
Singapore.
Germany or Singapore or somebody, like, if Italy, whatever, if they need to make decisions about spending money or uh, doing anything with their
Oh man.
industry, have some other government come make the decision for them. They've lost their privileges, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
It,
know I'm not Australian and I can't take their privileges away,
yeah.
but as a world
Man, they
citizen,
scorched part of the Earth's lungs.
yeah.
The thing that about that is that there have been fires raging across portions of America every summer for the last decade, and parts of Canada too, but it just doesn't get publicized the way that we see the Amazon fire, or the
Uh,
fire in Africa, or the fire in
yep.
Australia. It's publicized heavily here. I'm pretty sure parts of Siberia were on fire at one point. So it's not like it's an isolated thing. The world is
No,
burning, and we only hear about the stories that work towards, confirming some, whatever their consent they're trying to manufacture.
some
They're trying to get people to divide against Australia because they say Australia is not doing something right. So now the environmentalists will be like, these bastards are doing all this shit wrong, and they are. But I think
well,
I think
I'm
there's a lot more. I think there's more to it than just like, you know, they're fucking up. Everyone's fucking up.
well, yeah, I'm not saying that the American government should keep the keys to the car either.
Yeah.
I think somebody needs to take the keys from the American
I think
government
last
too.
summer some asshole, started his campfire and left to go into town, and when he was on his way back, the whole place was already on fire. I'm pretty sure one of
Well,
those.
and there was an electric company that started it too.
Well, that was a different fire.
Right, yeah,
And then they
that's
met.
another no,
They
full
met
other
in the
fire.
middle. Yeah, and then they want to PG&E. They want to and
Yeah.
they want to charge the state even more money to fix the infrastructure that they were already paid to update. So
I
it's a
mean,
it's a
they
shit
should be in
sandwich.
jail. They should
Yeah.
be in jail. Is the bottom line.
Yeah.
But I guess when the quote unquote president of this country holds stock in a pharmaceutical company that makes a drug he's been promoting, and he's still not in handcuffs, I guess we're not going to really expect people to be held accountable because no government official in any capacity should be able to hold stock privately and not have it public, or hold stock period. It's got to be one of those two.
Pretty sure that this is why they were concerned about the annulments clause, because he was not divesting from any of his interests.
It's not just him. It's not just him.
I know it's everyone.
Yeah,
There's also
it's like Dianne Feinstein.
Every single yeah exactly every single senator who sold stock before the announcement that this thing was real, while they were still calling it a hoax and trying to say that it was just going to go away, that it was just pneumonia, or the flu's the worst. And
I always wondered why Nancy Pelosi was holding back on impeachment, and I didn't buy that it was because she wasn't trying to play politics. And I'm just wondering how many of those people in the old Democrat Senate or House have a bunch of shit that they're not supposed to have, because they've been there way too fucking long.
Of course they've got
not to have a bunch of stock.
I think they call those skeletons. They've got closets full of skeletons.
Skeletons and stocks that they shouldn't have.
Skeletons stuffed with socks or stocks.
Yeah, man. And that's where I'm like, let's not make it political. Let's investigate all of them. Let's investigate all their fucking stocks, because the clean ones will come out clean. I don't give a fuck if they're Republican or Democrat. If they don't own any stocks they shouldn't, they'll be clean. Let's investigate all of those motherfuckers and find out what stocks they own and why they're telling us what they're saying when we're trying to fix the problems in this country, but they just want to make it about next election cycle and the next election cycle. Because I'm like trying to figure out how people are rationalizing what are we supposed to do until fucking November? Like, just wait a fucking round and vote against COVID? Like, is that people on the left's response to COVID? Just wait until November and vote for Biden. Well, what about till November? I might fucking die, man. I'm in an at-risk group.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if these people know, these people that they're telling just wait till November to vote, we might fucking die, y'all. You can't tell us this, put it off. Like, we need to fucking do something. I'm not understanding how people have gotten so complacent. And I understand we're all effectively stuck inside. That don't mean we can't fucking... People make GoFundMes all the fucking time. If we can't organize some sort of... I've seen people making groups to get masks to doctors and shit. There's things you can do right now where you don't have to get out of your house and go fucking protest on the street, because that don't fucking work anyway. So, like, if we're gonna do something as people on the left, we gotta do it before November to make sure a lot of people don't die so they can vote in November. And I think there's things you can do from the safety of your home. You can fight misinformation. You can post news stories that are legitimate from like the World Health Organization or the CDC, not from MSNBC and not MSNBC, because a lot of people will post ABBC or like AGC or something, and it looks like a legitimate news source, but it's made to, because it's like a fake news source, but they make it look just enough like MSNBC, because then if you don't look in the middle, you don't see that it's MSNBC and not MSNBC.
Yeah. Consumer News Global. It's all commercials.
Oh man. Or to the date. I've seen a lot of people posting shit that's not from this year and then be like, oh, I knew it was from 2009. No, the fuck you didn't. You read the headline and you didn't go look at the date of when the article was posted, because if the article was posted today, it would be super relevant, but the article was posted 7 years ago or 11 years, whatever. So it's not relevant anymore. And I see a lot of people doing this shit, and when they get called out on it, they try to act like they knew what they were doing. No, you didn't.
I don't know. If somebody shares, like, the death of some musician that was several years ago, and because it's their birthday, that's different.
Yeah, that's not what I'm
That's more
talking
like
about.
honoring the memory of someone who contributed to society.
That's not what I'm talking about at
No, I know
all.
you're talking about like flooding in Indonesia being
Exactly.
posted, or like tsunami in Bangladesh.
Shit like that. And it's like, oh, from 2011, why are you posting it now? Oh, you read the headline and thought it was breaking news, and you want to be the first
Yeah.
person.
SARS vaccines confirmed 2006 or something like that.
So if you don't want to like do other shit, you can fight that type of misinformation from the safety of your own home, from your computer, because that shit is dangerous.
Yeah.
That's legitimately dangerous. But again, this notion that it's a binary, everything is voting, and you can only like now that we have Biden as the Democratic candidate, we have to like. I'm writing in
Oh,
somebody. I'm
so
not voting for a fucking
so
potential rapist. I'm not doing it.
the latest argument that I've heard for support of Biden, and it's basically the next version of Blue No Matter Who, and it makes sense actually, is we're not voting for Biden, we're voting for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement, and it's like, wait a second, that's a straw man.
Super straw man.
That's like a
Straw
textbook
man.
straw man.
Yep.
That's the straw man right there. That's the argument now. We're at the straw man point.
Because if he's gonna replace her with somebody who's on the left anyway, because he doesn't believe in Medicare for all, he doesn't believe in universal basic income, he doesn't believe in legalization of marijuana, he doesn't believe in ending the drug war.
The dude
So
created
like,
the Rave Act.
what do you mean?
He also prevented millions of people from was it clearing student debt through
Yep,
bankruptcy.
yep. He's
He prevented that.
directly involved with that.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg with somebody who's right wing, okay, and that's I'm at this point where people will try to equate me with like a Trump supporter because I dare question what they're doing, and that's like some authoritarian, sheepish, fascist bullshit from
Yeah.
the left.
No,
So I'm saying like
that's
you can't come at me as a fascist from the left and then get mad at me when I call you a fascist when you're trying to tell me what to do.
yeah.
So it's this weird place in America right now where you can't question the left without being a Trump supporter. Like now, all of a sudden, anybody who questions anything the left wing does at any given point is immediately equated with the Trump supporter, just to like quell any dissent. And it's fucked up that we're at that point because this is how sheeps get born and led to slaughter. And that's kind of where I'm like, Joe Biden is a losing candidate. So anybody who follows Joe Biden to the election is getting led to a fucking. He's not gonna win.
No, I think once we finally get to see him and Cheeto Mussolini talk to each other, they're on the debate stage. It's going to be the most bizarre series of ums and uhs and.
Not a single full sentence between the two
No,
of
it's
them.
gonna be so incoherent.
Oh my God.
Anyone who tries to play the presidential debate drinking game is gonna end up in the hospital. They'll probably end up contracting fucking COVID-19 too. Don't do it, people. It's not worth it. Oh
Oh
God.
man.
Seriously, the 2020 presidential debate drinking game is not to be advised. No one, not even the champions of champions will be able to play this game. Their livers will fail. They'll suffer severe brain damage. It's just not worth it.
It's hard being on the left wing right now.
It'll
man.
it'll
It
induce
really
like
is.
a mass vomiting so violent that all of the toilet systems will fail, like in some college satire.
It's yeah.
Oh man,
Because then what are you supposed to do? All you can do is drink. All you can do is drink to that shit, man. When you have Joe Biden as your fucking presumptive nominee, as somebody who's supposed to believe in social justice, We're the social justice warriors that fucking rednecks make fun of on the weekends when they're like, "Oh, these snowflakes." That's us that they're making fun of. Joe Biden is our presumptive nominee. That's who represents, and that's again. It's like this notion of Joe Biden actively came out and was like saying he wasn't paying attention to young people at first. So when you have somebody who doesn't support any political ideologies that align with what you believe in, but happens to be a Democrat somehow. I don't know how this dude is a Democrat.
Well,
but somehow he's a Democrat.
Elizabeth Warren was a
fault?
Republican at one point. You know, they
But
just
because
because they changed.
It's our fault.
Just cause, no, it's not. Just because they register as something else doesn't change their core belief system. You can't just change some words on a piece of paper and change everything that you've worked for in your life. It doesn't quite work like that. There's still like a history of behavior or output or conduct or any of those things or whatever they want to call it, political background, and that's the reality. Is there's a history, but we're not really able to look back and reflect on that history very well as a group, because people, well, man, it's like the Bible. You get people who interpret the same part of the Bible differently. You find out pick any part of the second Testament and just go to there's bound to be a website that has every different translations of whatever part of the Bible, right? Those things exist. And so you can find every version of whatever you want, John something, some number, some other number, right? And it'll always change. And this is the same thing that's going on with our media, with information in general. Even if everyone reads the same article, we're not all going to understand it the same way. Not everyone has the same level of reading comprehension. Not everyone even reads the same way.
I don't even think a lot of people realize Google Scholar exists.
Seriously, no analytical search should be made without like Google Scholar, your background. Like you can't just rely on normal Google, because that's just going to give you advertisements.
Yeah, and advertisements that you don't even necessarily know are advertisements. Because what I've realized is when you make a press release, once a press release gets republished, the information in the press release is then published in articles that you don't know came from a press release. So it's really easy to get paid information in mainstream news. You just have to know how to get the press releases in the cycle correctly.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, if you get, because news sources or media outlets have started publishing things off of Twitter now, if you get a press release and then have someone famous enough repost it on Twitter, then the story becomes secondhand through their tweet, and then the paid element is like completely lost. So there's all these ways to actively remove the pay trail of information planting. So like information can easily be planted in the public media in the same way that when that girl licked the toilet seat and was like, oh, it was a fake thing. She did the coronavirus challenge, but she had like bleached the toilet seat before, but didn't put that on the video and was trying to make it as if it was like a public toilet that she was licking. And so it was like, there's all these things because the media picked up on it. She then was like, oh, I was trying to manipulate the media, and she did. So because she made something appear one way and it was actually another, and the media ran with it, she successfully manipulated the media on a small level and then they turn it around and make the story about them getting manipulated by her so they don't lose their credibility. And this is what they do over and over and over, which is why after the fucking War of the Worlds podcast, or not podcast, radio broadcast, people still listen to news on the radio or on in the same methods that could then manipulate them to have a War of the Worlds freak out, like the same way they did with the toilet paper, because the media turns around and blames the panic on something else besides themselves, even though they're the ones that caused the panic.
So it turns out that the bulk of the coronavirus infections share genetic traits with the strain that came from Europe. Like, like the biggest epicenter in the United States did not arise from China. It came from Europe.
Uh-oh.
Whoops.
Whoops. Whoops.
Like, so, people get things wrong sometimes.
Yeah. And we shouldn't start calling it the European travelers virus.
Oh, man.
The Euro travelers virus, because that would be a little...
Well,
I don't know if it would be racist, because Europe isn't a race.
The Euro-Rona.
Euronavirus?
That's just wrong.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
We started calling it... Is technically European is not a race.
Yeah,
So it wouldn't be racist if we started calling it the Eurona.
It's a continent. It's like people think Africa is a country, but it's a continent.
Yes, exactly.
Again, one more time. Africa is a continent.
And Europe is a union as well. Africa has a union too now. So
Yeah.
They've had them for a while, but yeah. The EU and the AU.
Oh, man.
But
the American Union wouldn't work because the AU monogram's already taken.
Yeah.
All their luggage would get confused.
Well, we'd have to put a flag in it and claim it. That's how it's like. It's the AU with an American flag in it because we fucking reclaimed that shit and discovered it.
A flag within a flag. Oh, man. So it's like a simulated flag.
Yeah, exactly.
It's analogous to our government right now.
It represents fucking stealing some shit and making up like you made it yourself.
So you know how they said that video piracy and music piracy would kill their respective industries. It turns out that pirating movies and pirating music did not kill anything. Disney, it has driven a lot of the big studios to start releasing their own content on their own platforms, and so we're finding that Disney is going to start releasing some movies that were slated for theater release on Disney Plus. Netflix has been leading the charge. They make movies and just release them straight to Netflix. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure Universal has their own network. I think they all do. They can all start doing this. And what's interesting is that it wasn't piracy that killed the movie theater. It was coronavirus.
Yep. Because
it was an unsustainable industry where they tried to milk us all for our soda and popcorn.
Yeah, right.
Dude, when my dad was a kid, I'm not a kid, teenager, he said that he would go to the movie theater with like a quarter. He would get in for a nickel. He would buy his popcorn, soda, and payday bar. And then he would still have another nickel to get into the next movie or something like that. 25 cents or something? That's incredible.
Yeah. No, I remember going to the movies as a kid, and they were still affordable enough that it's like...
Yeah, matinee was only like $3. $4. There were still dollar theaters.
Yeah, that's right. Basically.
We need more. I think the only way to save the movie theater is the dollar theater, but good luck keeping everyone away from each other, because you can't have people in a movie theater.
I don't really care about saving it personally. Yeah. I don't. I just can't pretend I do, because like I've looked at the virtual movie theaters in VR, and you can see other people and they have their avatars, so it's like You know, if you want to go in a fucking theater to see other people, you can still do that,
Yeah, and
and you can have your own popcorn at home and not have a $7 hot dog and
yeah,
fucking
you can make your own hot dog.
yeah, but still, you know,
You can make your own hot
and
dog and get up and make your own hot dog while wearing the VR headset and never miss a step. You just look down below the
and
screen.
but with the microphone, if you want it on, you can still hear people chatting in the audience and shit too. So everybody's
Yeah,
watching the same movie, and you know they do that Netflix party thing. But if it's in VR, then it's just you know, it's like being at a theater without having to smell somebody who didn't take a shower that day.
yeah.
Like, I have no problems with that personally because I
You know,
don't,
no,
you
you're
know,
right. I don't think there's a. I don't think that's a. There's. I don't think that the movie theater crowd is as high risk as the bar crowd. I think there. I feel like that's a different.
right.
There might be some overlap, but I think that the vast majority of people that are going to movies, they're not trying to be out at like 3 in the morning.
Somebody can't shoot up a VR movie theater.
Yeah.
And I have it be like just we're gonna respawn. I fucking respawn in the VR movie theater. Somebody shoots that shit up.
Somebody starts shooting somebody up in the VR movie theater. Everyone in the who's in the theater like opens up their menu and pulls out their defense.
Right.
And then some
I'll hit
like
him with some like fucking wizard magic or some shit because it's
lightning bolt,
VR.
lightning
Yeah,
bolt.
but yeah, that's not how that works in real life.
Yeah,
Because unfortunately, you have to worry about that shit in the movie theater in fucking 2020. So I
yeah.
like
God,
it's not,
that shouldn't.
you know, it's not like you should worry about it every time, but you have to. So that's kind of where I'm like, on the one hand, I enjoy not worrying, but on the other hand, America's fucked up and people have a lot of guns and people do dumbass shit. And every time I go out in public, I worry that somebody might do some dumbass shit just because it's America. So
Yeah,
that's just the byproduct of being aware of existence. Which is why I stay my ass at home most of the time anyway.
yeah.
Before quarantine, I was in the house most of the time
And
anyway.
that's one of those things that I notice. I mean, I work from home. I work online. I go to school online. I had one class that required that I leave the house. I went to my parents' house once a week to, hang out with my parents and drop off some trash or whatever. But, aside from having to be, aware of what's going on and trying to make good decisions and exercise good judgment about when I go and get supplies, my life is pretty much the same right now. And I realize that's kind of a tough pill to swallow because I know that for a lot of people, a lot of things changed pretty dramatically. Um, Although I'm very pleased actually because I feel like I've seen fewer posts that look like people are climbing out of their skin and climbing up walls and going stir crazy. I feel like that initial antsiness has subsided on the internet,
Hmm.
but it's being replaced with all sorts of election nonsense and
Yeah. I see like the CDC is even talking about opening up the economy already. I'm just like, man, this is fucking genocide. It's like people didn't learn about Stalin. This is what happens when you don't learn about Stalin.
yeah, it's we can't you can't expect people to know anything about Stalin in a culture that vilifies what they think is communism.
Right. Yeah. Or know the difference between Vladimir Ilyich and why they're not the same. Like him and Stalin are not the same at all. And equating them just because they're both like Soviet communists is very it's just flat out idiotic. There's
Yeah.
no there's no other way about it. But in that the lesson of the starvation of all of the Soviet satellites and forcing them to work and making it about the nation that had just absorbed them it's like all these people who are ready to go die for an economy didn't learn about Stalin clearly, and that that when it's obvious they didn't learn about history, the way they treat black people, but when they start willingly marching to their deaths because they didn't learn about Stalin, it's really obvious too.
Yeah. I don't think that they covered much of the Soviet Union, and even in like the high school government and world history classes that I took. I'm pretty sure I had to take a college level course before I ever got anything meaningful out of a academic discussion of socialism and communism.
It's so much history. It's just so much history, man. Like it's really hard to understand how shit plays out in that, because they don't teach us history here properly. They try to teach it chronologically. But history is better. Like the way I started to really understand history is like when you can focus on something you like and start to figure out how that thing affected something else, but then start to figure out what affected the creation of that thing. And you really start to see like there's no single point in history. The way we use that phrase, it's like everything's connected, and it's obviously a river. But if you want to look at a single point in the stream, you can filter out it through a lens, but nothing's ever disconnected from anything. But it's really hard to understand that the way they teach us history here is it's like, oh, it's 1918, now it's 1919, now it's 1920, as if a legislative event happens and triggers the result the next day, and everything, it's not that time moves in curves, and it's not always forward.
No,
as we can see with like Texas and Louisiana rolling back abortion rights during the pandemic.
Speaking of what is it? Tennessee? Is that what we said? Or Kentucky?
I know it's at least Texas and Louisiana, so it's probably more.
Oh,
there's at least two.
Well,
these fucking backwards ass hits.
I think they try to do that in Indiana also.
Of course.
I think it may probably. I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say it's probably Ohio as well, because Ohio seems to do some pretty tough shit every so often. I'd be surprised if Florida wasn't in on this, but they're probably too crazy working on, trying to get their beaches back in order.
I think this is a good note to end on, because it's a really positive note. I realized the Bible. Now, hear me out. The Bible, the only reason anybody can ever interpret it in any sort of negative light is because nobody ever fucking listened in the Bible. The Bible, anytime there was a catastrophe, there was a warning attached to it, but also with the warning was a population that called itself religion that didn't fucking listen. So if we had somebody literally named Noah, and the Christian God came down to Noah and said, hey, Noah, tell these people to fucking wear masks so they don't get COVID-19. Christians wouldn't fucking listen, and that shit is in the goddamn Bible. So we really should just look at the Bible as a series of unfortunate warnings that weren't paid attention to. And it wasn't catastrophes. Well, it was failed warnings. Catastrophes could have prevented.
Lot listened. His wife didn't.
His wife didn't. She looked back.
Yeah, she turned into a pillar of salt. So the moral of the story is, don't look back. Don't turn into a pillar of salt.
And if you hear it random, pay attention.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.